I tell you what you get. Call the police. Get what you deserve.
It's a delightful time to be a film fan, especially this Halloween season with releases in the indie horror genre like The Substance, which is a masterpiece, The Front Room, Cuckoo, but on the other side of that coin, you have big budget Hollywood titles like Transformers 1, Megalopolis, and Joker, Folie, Deux. So what did I decide to do one chilly October Tuesday that could have been spent from the warmth and comfort of my home? You better believe I abandoned it to watch robots and Adam Driver and dancing clowns, with all three of these films having a wide range of critical and audience reception, and most importantly, all of them failing at the box office. It's not very often that you can watch three big budget box office flops in one day at the theater, so I seized the opportunity while I could, although this video could be made outdated soon, depending on any surprise success, but I doubt that. Starting the marathon off right at noon with
Hey, Darkwing! Don't. My finger can transform. Guess which one?
Transformers 1 still has a chance for redemption with good enough word of mouth, finally opening worldwide in all markets starting on October 10th, and being heavily carried by the TF Hype Guy on Twitter. Hopefully, it still has a chance of some success. Optimus Prime would be very proud of him. An animated prequel reboot, Transformers 1, directed by Josh Cooley, does have the distinct honor of being the first Hollywood-produced Transformers film since the 1986 classic to be completely animated, and to be completely focused on the actual Transformers, and not whatever Michael Bay was trying to do.
Bumblebee, stop lubricating the man.
If you look at online sentiment for Transformers 1, you'll come to two conclusions among fans. Paramount did an absolute job of marketing the movie. The box office numbers heavily reflect this, as animated films for children tend to perform well if they're marketed enough, especially when there's few other animated films competing for attention right now, and they're not terrible. Transformers is also an established franchise, so honestly, Transformers 1 could have and should have been a slam dunk for Paramount, especially because Transformers 1 is pretty good. Transformer 1's biggest strengths come down to the background detail and design of the world and characters. The character models are a major highlight. I love the shiny, very blocky, toy-like design for the Transformers. It's especially noticeable early on in the film when the main characters can't transform, so their lesser, more dull, and smaller designs make a nice contrast to characters like Darkwing or the Primes. Scarlett Johansson and Brian Tyree Henry give the best vocal performances as Alita 1 and D-16, who will go on to become the series villain Megatron. Chris Hemsworth gives a fine performance as Orion Pax, aka Optimus Prime. There are many parts in the film where it feels like Chris Hemsworth is struggling to shake off his native Australian accent. I'm usually not perceptible to actors trying to do a more American English accent, but here it was pretty noticeable. And Keegan-Michael Key as Bumblebee, I didn't care for. Much of the comedic relief from him didn't really land, and also I can't imagine Optimus Prime ever wanting to work with this guy after the events of this story. Not only is he annoying, but also he starts off the movie as being actually insane. He's locked to solitary work since he never shuts up, and he starts talking to imaginary friends he builds out of robot garbage. I mean, it's played for laughs, but I think Bumblebee seems like an actual hazard to be around. The story is fairly predictable. You can already guess most of the plot twists and how events will unfold, but there's a great strength between the brotherly, dare I say enemies to lovers relationship of Orion and D-16. It's a shame then that around the halfway point of the film, when the main conflict is revealed, that the two spend much less time interacting. D-16 is so laser focused on resolving the conflict of the film in his own way that he kind of becomes removed from the bigger picture because the film focuses more on Orion and his journey to become a leader of Cybertron. The story would have been improved a lot if it remained as equally focused on the two of them for the second half of the film as it did for the first. The last 10 to 20 minutes of the film are an exception to this. It's pretty great. Aside from all that, the action's pretty enjoyable and flashy. There's some clever uses of their Transformer abilities. The fact that it's animated gives a lot more room for verticality and bigger set pieces as opposed to the more grounded Bay films. I'm not knocking on the action of the Bay films, but the contrast between the two styles is a welcome change of pace. There's a lot of chase sequences in the film though, or scenes where the characters have to run away from or towards something. That's not a criticism, just a funny little observation I had. I don't know, it stuck out to me. There's one moment towards the end of the film that I pogged at. Maybe I'm crazy, but I swear I saw the combo finisher from Transformers Devastation used at one point in the final act. If that's an intentional reference from the filmmaker's part, that's pretty good. The movie's charming, but the humor is mostly just fine. I only remember properly laughing at one joke in the film. The rest were grins and chuckles at best. There's some good themes in the film regarding oppression, control of the lower working class, and how leadership can take shape in many forms. The contrast between Orion and D16 was a neat way of showing how leadership and power, although acting very differently, can be born from the same source. One thing this film was missing for me is that super crunchy sound design that really defined much of the Bay Transformer films. Like 'em or hate 'em, and believe me, between racist robots, blatant sexualization, and horrible comedy, there is a lot to hate about them. But from a technical aspect, the Bay Transformer films are technical marvels, and some of that striking personality and style is missing with this film. Another major highlight with this film's story compared to previous Transformers films is that it does a really good job at highlighting why Optimus Prime is such a cool and important character. Without spoiling anything, he's basically the equivalent of Robot Jesus by the end of the film, and it's pretty sweet to see how it goes down. The moment where Orion truly becomes Optimus is really cool. If the relationship between Megatron and Optimus had more of a focus for the second half of the movie, then that ending would have hit way harder. I also think that D16's journey could have had a little more time spent on it. It felt like there were some sudden leaps in character that didn't entirely work for me. The D16 at the beginning of the film didn't seem entirely capable of some of the choices he made at the very end of the film. We needed a little more time with him to justify certain decisions and leaps in logic. I would have liked to have seen more of an internal struggle or crisis of faith from him. It was definitely being carried by Brian Tyree Henry. He completely kills the role. There's not much more I can say about Transformers 1 other than that it's very solid, and most people will really like it. In the grand scheme of animated films, it's not really breaking new ground, and it feels very much like a superhero film since the idea of transforming in this film is almost treated like a superpower. That's a very fun way to approach it, but some might see that as more tired and overused. After a crisp 2 hours with Transformers, the marathon was off to a good start. However, it's not much of a spoiler alert to say that from here on out, things are gonna get worse.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
After some Cherry Coke Zero and a quick walk around the theater, it was time for Megalopolis, directed by the revered Francis Ford Coppola. It is a lot. In fact, the story behind Megalopolis and how it was made, and the production issues and history spanning literal decades, is much more interesting than the film itself. I highly encourage you to look into it for yourself, but from the film spending decades in development hell, to trouble financing the film, to Coppola scouting for filming locations in New York in 2001 when the September 11 attacks happened, shortly followed by Coppola wanting to rewrite the film, then a 20-year hiatus that eventually led to Coppola amassing a winery that he would then sell at least some of in order to finance the film himself. Megalopolis is a self-funded, self-marketed, as Coppola also funded the marketing campaign, pure labor of love passion project from the director of The Godfather and Apocalypse Now that's finally arrived in theaters. So what do I think? I have no idea. That was my main takeaway from the film. I didn't have a strong negative reaction or positive reaction. I felt nothing. I've not done any kind of recap for story or research, aside from a quick blurb of the film's premise, so everything I tell you is solely based on what I gathered from the film. To describe it briefly, Megalopolis is set in an alternate history New York City called New Rome, and the story is meant to be a parallel of Roman history and the transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. Adam Driver is the lead as Caesar, a CEO or president of some kind of technology architecture company that is fixated on creating Megalopolis, a transformation of New Rome into a utopia. Giancarlo Esposito plays the mayor Cicero, who is in opposition to Driver's ambitions and intentions, and Natalie Emanuel is his daughter Julia Cicero, who develops a relationship with Driver. Oh, and Adam Driver can stop time, which I think was supposed to be very important for the story. It's featured in the first and final scenes of the film, but I still have no idea about its significance. I will say that the highlight for the film is Adam Driver and everything regarding his performance. He is so theatrical with his body language and his delivery of some of his lines. It borders on complete ridiculous, near parody levels of performance, but there was something very striking watching his character Caesar and the conflicts he faced, or at least what I can only describe as conflicts. Much of the story revolves around different political figures and people in power trying to further their different goals in New Rome, either through marriage into families to inherit wealth, or betrayal of figures for financial gain. It felt like an attempt at a Game of Thrones-like story set in a dystopian yet very familiar world. I should mention by now, I am not a Coppola fanatic. I've only ever seen Apocalypse Now and Bram Stoker's Dracula. When it comes to commenting on a director's vision or style, I'm not at all equipped to offer a healthy perspective. I'd wager I'm one of very few people who's seen Megalopolis before watching The Godfather, so keep that in mind. Megalopolis' story felt unwieldy. While I had a mostly clear understanding of character personalities and the general sense of their goals and motivations, the story felt like a non-linear, sporadic tale involving a few too many different characters without any one of them standing out in particular, except for Driver's Caesar. The dialogue can range from metaphorical and unwieldy to complete ridiculousness in a way that I have no idea how other people would react to. Audrey Plaza, playing a character named Wow Platinum, has some of the most ridiculous lines in the film that, when viewed without the full context of the story, would give The Room a run for its money. The film's shot beautifully at times, with many indoor sequences having striking set design that feels somewhere between the high sci-fi of Dune and the grounded oppressiveness of Coppola's other works, yet littered with Roman Colosseum-y architecture everywhere. The nighttime scenes, or really any scene shot in the dark room, tend to have the most impressive visuals. At times, Megalopolis can look like a dystopian mirror of New York City, and other times, it kinda just looks like New York. The inconsistency of Megalopolis is probably the most consistent thing about the film. I wouldn't say that it's like two opposing films fighting for control, but more so very much the result of a film that was in development hell for decades, and even as it was in full production, dealt with on-set issues. For every scene that involves some interesting editing or sound design choice, there's a scene with Shia LaBeouf playing someone that stepped right out of a Shakespearean production, or a scene involving a murder that was committed using a tiny bow and arrow that looks like a toy from Walmart. It's a film that, given some of the set pieces, performances, and dialogue, almost feels like it would have lent itself much better as a live stage play, rather than a feature film. I wonder if Megalopolis, at any point in its long production history, was ever conceived of as a play. Something about the style of the movie feels like it would benefit from being performed in front of a live audience. It's a film that somehow everyone is simultaneously correct about. If someone were to tell me that they found it to be the most horrendous pile of dog shit, or a lifelong magnum opus that should be studied for years, I would understand both perspectives, but I can't agree with either of them. For me, as I said before, I have absolutely no thoughts on Megalopolis. Save for that, I guess I was never bored watching it. I was deeply fascinated by what I was looking at and in trying to understand what the movie wanted and was trying to say, but I never found an answer to that question. In that, Megalopolis is some kind of achievement. I've never in my life watched a film that left me with such a neutral, nothing feeling. Usually I feel some kind of strong reaction towards negativity, contempt, enjoyment, or absolute love. Even dreadful boredom. I can confidently say I felt none of these things watching Megalopolis, and think it'll be a long time before I watch a film again that elicits the same pure, absolute nothingness. Maybe you'll find the answer to Megalopolis that I never did. Given how it's performing, you definitely won't find that answer in a theater near you, although with Coppola financing and marketing the movie himself, its success in theaters is not nearly as important as the other two films on this list. This film was his baby, an unadulterated, unfiltered passion project straight from one of the most influential filmmakers in history, and for that, I'm glad that something like Megalopolis got made. It's art for the sake of no one but the artist, and even though I couldn't take away anything from the film, I'm glad there are others who can. Anyways, speaking of art for the sake of no one but the artist, I'm gonna make two things perfectly clear before I say anything about Joker Folie, Deux, written and directed by Mr. Hangover himself, Todd Phillips. I had already heard plenty of how this film was hated, and with special regards to how people thought of the ending. So much so that my friend had told me what the ending was. So I went into Joker Folie, Deux having a first-hand account of what the film's ending entailed without too many details. I'm not here to change your mind on the film. If you absolutely hate the film, I will never try and convince you otherwise. And if you're one of the very rare few to love this film, I'm not going to convince you that it's some irredeemable piece of garbage that should have never been made and is a disgrace to the first movie, or all clowns everywhere, or whatever people are saying. I haven't looked into the negative reception. All of these thoughts are mine alone. All that is to say, I don't know, man. I thought it was like, okay, I guess.
What? No, all right. I know that sounds bad.
Maybe it's the fact that I was feeling tired at this point, having spent 6 hours away from home and 2 of those hours being dealt psychic damage by Megalopolis. Maybe knowing the film's ending in advance makes the rest of the film and the ending itself a lot more palatable. I have no clue, but Joker Folie, Deux is not that bad. Now, before you keyboard warriors start typing to clown on me, just keep this in mind. Even though this review will probably be more positive than most of the ones you'll find online, don't get it twisted. This won't be a glowing praise of Joker 2. The film's fine, but there are a lot of problems. If you really love the first Joker movie, you'll find a lot to like with this one. It does feel like a very natural continuation of the first film in many ways. Any and all criticisms of the film come down to the narrative, story, and pacing. Because when it comes down to every other aspect, the cinematography, music, and editing were all handled by the same crew as the previous film. You've got Lawrence Sher, Hirda Gunatatar, and Jeff Groth on hand. That is to say, from a visual and audible standpoint, the movie's fantastic. It manages to be grimy and grim without sacrificing color and style. There are some shots in the film that are completely gorgeous. Of the three films here, Joker 2 definitely excels best in its visual language. While the original score by Gunatatar doesn't have as much room to shine as with the first film, it's still a highlight. I think all the performances are quite good, and while there aren't as many noteworthy moments with Joaquin Phoenix's performance compared to the first film, that mostly comes down to the script not having enough interesting material for him to work with. He's still quite enjoyable to watch, and very much seems like he enjoys playing this character. Whatever grievances you have with either of these films, you'll never convince me that he's giving a bad performance. The more ridiculous Joker acts and behaves, the more fun it is. The movie has some actually funny moments, with one of them revolving around Joker putting on this ridiculous, I guess Southern-like accent when he's in the courtroom. It feels exactly like something that comic book Joker would do. He wouldn't take a trial against him seriously. He'd be cracking jokes and poking fun at the whole process. Conceptually, the idea of a DC film being a black comedy courtroom drama musical about the Joker, that's genius. He's a character that lends himself well to being a bombastic theatrical center of attention, if done correctly. Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, or a very different take on Harley Quinn, complements Phoenix. They have an enjoyable chemistry that never feels quite right, quite true to whatever Arthur Fleck may be feeling. It's a one-sided relationship of control, miscommunication, and manipulation, similar to what Arthur had with his mother in the previous film. In fact, there are many elements in the film's story that mirror elements from the first, and I think from a narrative standpoint, those are the film's biggest strengths. Much of the film is trying to revolve around the idea of Arthur Fleck and the Joker, how these two different personalities clash, and whether or not they are in fact the same person. This idea is hammered home by the intro of the movie, which is an incredible old-school Tom and Jerry-like animated sequence recounting the ending of the first film, but painting the idea that Arthur was not in control, and it was only Joker who went on to the Murray Franklin show. Arthur Fleck was left behind. Anyone who's seen the first film can understand this line of thinking. By the end of that film, when he's asked to be introduced as Joker, he's completed his transformation. Arthur Fleck is gone and only the Joker remains. And this animated sequence for the sequel reminds us of that, but paints it more from the perspective of Arthur Fleck, almost watching from the sidelines as Joker takes over. This is the setup for the conflict of the film, a court case against Arthur Fleck, where the defense tries to make the point that Arthur and Joker are two different people, and Arthur isn't responsible for the crimes that Joker committed. But the movie fails at committing to this idea, and its failure in commitment is its greatest shortcoming in every aspect of the film. Joker Folie Deux has a lot of great ideas and concepts bubbling underneath, but the movie and script are too afraid to truly delve into Arthur's mind and explore this concept of dual personalities that the movie is so clearly trying to hammer home. Everyone is telling Arthur that he is or isn't the Joker, but we rarely get any perspective on how he actually feels or thinks about it. He has a much more passive role in this story compared to the first. Everything is happening to him, rather than in the first film, where he was the main orchestrator of the events that led him to becoming the Joker. The best moments in the film revolve around Joker doubting himself as the Joker and questioning his actions. There's a heartbreaking scene involving his fellow co-worker that he let go in the third act of the previous film, being called as a witness in Arthur Fleck's televised court case. I have to give actor Lee Gill major props. This scene is a little heartbreaking. Gary talks about how terrified he is of Joker and how sad he is to see what happened to Arthur, since Arthur was the only person that treated him well. You see a hint of doubt in Joker's face, because despite him brushing off this testimony and treating it like some big joke, Gary's testimony and plea to Arthur breaks through Joker. And I thought to myself, holy shit, this scene is awesome. It reminded me a little bit of the end of The Killing Joke and how you see the humanity in Joker breaking through. It's just a shame that it took maybe 90 minutes into the film to get to this point. Why did it take so long? Well, maybe because all of the You know, there's actually a really funny thing regarding the musical numbers. I remember at one point Todd Phillips making a comment along the lines of the film not really being a musical, just having musical elements. And then everyone on the internet clowned on him, even now to this day, because the film's very obviously a musical, right? There's musical sequences, song and dance numbers. You can't go 5 minutes without Lady Gaga breaking out into song. I'm not gonna lie, he was actually kind of telling the truth. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Joker 2 isn't a musical. What I will tell you is that it doesn't at all commit to this idea of being a musical. So it sits in this weird halfway point where it is, but it also isn't. When I think of musicals, and I'm no expert, so you're getting a very casual viewpoint, most of them typically have original songs that motivate and progress the story by offering insight into character personality and motivation, and they typically involve choreographed dance numbers that may involve extra background dancers and singers, and I would say that really isn't what Joker 2 is. It's a film that has moments where only Arthur and Harley are the only ones who ever actually sing a song, and as far as I know, none of the songs are originally written for the film. The singing sequences are very uninteresting, with most of them not involving any kind of creative cinematography and very limited choreography, or anything extra that makes musicals so typically theatrical and vibrant. I have no issue with the film being a musical. Honestly, it seems like a natural progression of the first film and Arthur's clear love of music and dancing. It makes sense for this character's imagination and hallucinations to take on a more dreamlike musical quality. And in that sense, the musical numbers that do involve a unique set with more production quality, those are the best musical moments in the film. But if I remember correctly, there were maybe 2 or 3 of those out of what felt like 8 or 9 singing sequences. And having some low-key, slower, romantic singing is fine. There's a scene where Harley is visiting Arthur in the hospital and having an intimate conversation through a window, where Harley starts singing "They Long to Be Close to You," as made famous by the Simpsons movie, and honestly, it's a nice moment. But I think after the 6th or 7th singing sequence that doesn't really tell us anything except that Joker and Harley are in love, I can't help but think, this movie is wasting time. There are some highlights between the two of them, like one that has much higher production quality and ends with Harley shooting Joker in the chest, but there are far too few of these, and even less of them that offers insight into what Joker thinks of himself. I see all of these elements, like Joker defending himself in a courtroom as a musical, and my mind can't help but wander in so many other directions. What if there was a scene involving Joaquin Phoenix playing the Joker as the judge, the witness, the prosecuting attorney, all raising an imaginary dream sequence case against Arthur? It could be an entire crazy moment in Arthur's head as he's trying to fight for control of his life and himself. It makes me think of the ending to Batman Arkham Knight, spoilers, in the crazy dream sequence at the end where we witness Joker's biggest fears manifest, and Batman, acting as a horror movie villain, stalks Joker and locks him away in a mental prison forever. There's no single scene in Joker Folie Deux that reaches that kind of insanity, and no scene that's as gripping as the finale to the first film. And however unoriginal the first film may be, with its parallels to famous Scorsese films that Todd Phillips would frequently reference, that ending and finale with Joker on the Murray Franklin show is still great. One of my favorite Joker film scenes. I think of a courtroom musical drama involving the Joker and how it could go in so many interesting, crazy directions. Yet really, for most of the film, it's just okay. It's not outrageously boring or offensively bad, just dull compared to what could have been with that kind of premise and setting. There are many elements to this film that feel like they're trying to mirror the first film. If the first film was the story of Arthur Fleck slowly devolving into the Joker, this film is trying to be the Joker, slowly regaining some semblance of humanity to revert back to Arthur by the very end. It feels like that's what the movie wants, and at different points it outright tells you this, but it never earns it in a natural way. One of the biggest parallels revolves around Joker's relationship to Murray Franklin in the first film, and Harley's relationship to Joker in this one. Arthur idolizes Robert De Niro's Murray, only to then realize that he's not what he hoped for, and his disappointment eventually leads to him being directly responsible for Murray's death. Harley, in much the same way, idolizes Joker, only to then later realize that he isn't really the Joker she was hoping for, and a strong moment at the end of the sequel where Arthur seemingly breaks through the Joker to finally confess his crimes and show some regret and guilt. Harley's disappointment then eventually leads to his death. Arthur Fleck dies at the end of the film at the hands of a Joker fanatic, who even kills him the same way he killed Murray, with a joke that ends with the exact same punchline: "You get what you f***ing deserve." While it obviously reflects the ending of the first film, it still feels like there were threads that the movie failed to properly connect. At this point, Arthur got his comeuppance for the crimes he committed, but one could argue that he had never been more human, more normal, more Arthur at this point. Murray, at worst, was an asshole, but didn't deserve a death at the hands of a mentally ill man. The film could have explored the idea that at this point, in his death, Arthur could potentially relate to Murray most and understand the pain and damage he had done. It was time to display his humanity, the true conflict of the film, the humanity of Arthur Fleck, at war with the insanity of the Joker. But this isn't really explored. Arthur dies, the movie ends, there's an implication that he was never the real Joker, and that this inmate who enacts revenge is possibly the one true Joker? That's not how I saw it. In fact, I'm still not entirely sure what I thought, even though I more or less knew the details of his death going into the film. To that I say, I think his death was pretty obvious, even if you hadn't had it spoiled like I did. The film hints at it many times with visions of Harley shooting Joker, or the court case against him going awfully for the whole film. Whether at the hands of the one true Joker, or by lethal injection, it's pretty obvious that Arthur was always going to die. I don't listen to what Todd Phillips says or what other people are saying. These are my thoughts alone. Was Arthur Fleck ever the Joker? Well, yes and no. The way the film depicts it, the Joker isn't some kind of person you become or transform. It's an idea that Arthur embodied. The film makes it clear from the beginning animated sequence that Arthur was always there, even if some may see this as a retcon of the first film. And the way this film ends, I don't see it being some kind of middle finger, spiteful message to the audience, saying that he was never the Joker. It's not about whether he was or wasn't. It's about the idea that the Joker never belonged to him. It was adopted by him, and now it moves on to the next person. The Joker isn't one man. It never was. It was just an idea, a persona that started with Arthur Fleck, and to me, that idea doesn't invalidate or negate the first film. In fact, I like this ending, in concept. There's a lot left to be desired when it comes to execution, but that's more or less my opinion of the entire film. Great concepts, subpar execution. Have I put too much thought into this film that barely anyone will watch and most people hate? You're goddamn right. Do I think this film is worth the negative reception it's getting? No. I do see it in a very similar light to the first film. Not remarkable enough to glorify and praise, but not disappointing or terrible enough to bash and drag through the mud. It's not great, but there are great moments. There are dozens of other comic book films that are significantly worse than this one. I'd much rather watch Joker 2 10 more times than sit through something like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania again. I really don't have anything good to say about that movie, other than Paul Rudd can elevate any script he's given. Joker 2, at the very least, looks and sounds like a real movie. There's actual production value and talent put behind it. It's just all in service of a story that could have been a lot more interesting, and there's not much left to say beyond that. I'm not in the business of giving scores, but I guess if I had to, then Joker Folie would get 2.5 stars out of 5. It's right down the middle for me, and just a bit less interesting than the first Joker. Although it is more original and has interesting moments, but really, it hardly deserves much of the attention it's getting, positive or negative. It's just fine. And let's score the previous 2 movies while I'm at it. You can interpret the score for Megalopolis however you like. Anyways, the moral of the story is, watch movies. Movies are fun, even bad ones. And make opinions for yourself. And stay off the internet. It's bad for your health. Feel free to call me a Joker 2 stan in the comments and hurl insults at me and my terrible opinions. I accept my fate. Okay, I'm gonna probably never think about these movies ever again. Except for Transformers. It's pretty good.